I never imagined that the quietest day of my life would be my husband Ernesto's funeral. After 42 years of marriage, there I was, standing next to his coffin with a terrifying message. I'm alive. That is not me in that coffin. I felt my world collapse. But before continuing, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love to know how far our stories reach. My name is Margarita Morales, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. There are stories that shatter you into 1,000 pieces, and this is mine. The funeral of my husband Ernesto was the quietest day of my existence. 42 years of marriage reduced to a body in a coffin, or so it was. I was standing next to his grave, my legs barely holding me up, when I felt my phone vibrate in the pocket of my only black dress. With trembling hands, I opened the message from an unknown number. The words I read froze my blood. I'm alive. That's not me in that coffin. My heart raced. It had to be a cruel joke, some kind of mistake. With shaky fingers, I typed, "I don't understand. Where are you?" The reply came immediately, "I can't say. They're watching me. Don't trust our sons." I lifted my eyes from the screen, my world crumbling like a sandcastle. I saw Carlos and Enrique, my own sons, standing on the other side of the coffin with strangely calm expressions. Something was wrong. Their tears seemed forced. Their hugs were as cold as the wind blowing through that cemetery. I remember the first time Ernesto spoke to me. It was a sunny Tuesday morning in San Juan del Rio, our little Mexican town. I was walking to the market in my faded green dress, carrying an empty basket I would fill with whatever little I could afford to feed my sick mother. He came out of his small bicycle shop, his hands stained with grease, and smiled at me with a shyness that melted my heart instantly. "Good morning, Margarita," he said softly. "Do you need me to take a look at your bicycle?" I didn't even own a bicycle, but I made up an excuse just to be able to talk to him. That simple moment turned into meetings under the big fig tree in the square, then into promises of eternal love, and finally into a modest wedding full of hope. The first years were difficult. We lived in a 2-room house with a tin roof that leaked whenever it rained. Ernesto worked from dawn to dusk in his shop, and I sewed clothes for the women in town. When Carlos was born, I felt a happiness I thought impossible. He was a perfect baby with his father's big eyes. 2 years later, Enrique arrived, equally beautiful. I raised them with all the love in the world, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. Ernesto was a wonderful father. He would take them fishing at the river on Sundays, teach them to fix things with their hands, and tell them bedtime stories. We were a united family, or so I thought. Over the years, things began to change. Carlos, the eldest, was always ambitious. From a young age, he questioned why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a car like other families. Enrique followed him in everything, as he always did. When Carlos turned 18, Ernesto offered him a job at the shop, but he rejected it with contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." Those words hurt Ernesto deeply. At night, I would see him on the porch, gazing at the stars with a sadness he tried to hide from me. His son hadn't just rejected his work, he had rejected his entire way of life. The years passed, and Carlos managed to make a name for himself in the real estate business in Mexico City. Enrique soon followed. They both began to earn money, far more than Ernesto and I had ever seen. At first, I was proud. My sons had escaped poverty, but little by little, that joy turned to sadness. Their visits became less frequent, their phone calls shorter. When they did come, they arrived in expensive cars, wearing elegant suits, speaking of investments and properties. They looked at our humble home with a strange mixture of pity and shame. "Mom," Carlos said during one visit, "you should move to a better place. This house is falling apart." He was right, but that house held all our memories. It was where we raised our children, where we shared countless meals, where we grew old together. It wasn't luxurious, but it was our home. Ernesto, always wise, would tell me, "Margarita, money has changed our sons. We're no longer enough for them." I refused to believe it. I kept justifying their absences, their brief calls, their broken promises. "They're busy building their lives," I told myself. One day they'll go back to being the loving boys we raised. But deep down, I knew Ernesto was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just didn't know how much they had become strangers to us. The biggest change came when Carlos married Jasmine Fuentes, a city woman who never hid her disdain for our simple lifestyle. The first time he brought her home, she arrived in high heels that sank into the dirt of our porch, and in an elegant red dress that seemed more expensive than everything I had ever owned. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced smile, extending just the tips of her fingers to greet me. Her eyes scanned our humble home with an expression that made me feel small. During dinner, she barely touched the food I had prepared with so much love. Carlos seemed nervous, constantly apologizing for things that had never embarrassed him before. "Next time we'll take them to a restaurant," he whispered to Jasmine, thinking I couldn't hear. But I heard, and each word pierced my heart like a knife. Enrique remained single, but he adopted the same distant attitude as his brother. His visits were limited to special occasions, and even then, he always seemed in a rush to leave, constantly on his phone closing business deals. Family Sundays became a distant memory. Christmases turned cold and formal. My sons brought expensive gifts we didn't need, stayed only a few hours, and then left with evident relief. Ernesto and I grew old alone, comforting each other. He kept working at his shop, though his hands no longer had the same strength. I continued sewing, though my eyesight was failing. We lived off our small pension, proud not to ask anything of our successful sons. "Do you know what the saddest part is, Margarita?" Ernesto told me one night as we drank coffee on the porch. "It's not that they have money. It's that money made them believe we're no longer important." Things worsened when Carlos bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood in Mexico City. Enrique followed his example, investing in a luxury condo worth $150,000. Suddenly, our sons owned fortunes we couldn't even imagine. "You should sell this house and move to a retirement community," suggested Jasmine during a visit. "There are very nice places for people your age." The word community hit me like a slap. A retirement community after 40 years of building our home. They wanted to send us to a nursing home. "We don't need a home," Ernesto replied with dignity. "We're fine here in our house." But I saw the look on Carlos and Enrique's faces. They agreed with Jasmine. To them, we were a burden, a problem to be solved in the most convenient way. That's when the more direct suggestions began. Carlos came one day with papers in hand, documents he had prepared without consulting us. "Dad, Mom," he said with that fake smile he had perfected, "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth at most $1,000. If you sell it, I can add some money so you can move to a better place." For us, there was no better place than the home where we had been happy for decades. But Carlos didn't understand. For him, everything came down to money. "Also," he continued, "I think Dad should retire from the shop. He's already 70. It's time to rest." Ernesto looked at him with infinite sadness. "Son, working is not a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive, what gives meaning to my days." "But you could hurt yourself," Enrique insisted. "At your age, an accident could be very dangerous." His words sounded caring, but I felt something else behind them, a certain impatience, an urgency I couldn't fully understand. The following months were tense. Our sons increased the pressure to sell the house. They brought real estate agents without warning. They appraised the property without our permission. During one particularly uncomfortable dinner, Carlos told us, "Jasmine and I have decided to have children soon. We're going to need help with expenses. If you sell the house and move somewhere smaller, that money could be an early inheritance." An early inheritance. He was asking for our inheritance while we were still alive. The audacity left me speechless. Ernesto remained calm, but I saw his jaw clench. "Son, when your mother and I die, everything we have will be yours. But as long as we're alive, the decisions are ours." "Don't be stubborn," Enrique interrupted harshly, in a way I had never seen before. "You're old. You can't keep living in the past." That night after they left, Ernesto and I talked until dawn. For the first time in our marriage, we discussed the possibility that our sons were the people we thought we had raised. "Something's wrong, Margarita," my husband said. with a worry I had never seen in his eyes. This isn't just ambition or impatience. There's something darker behind all this pressure. I had no idea how deeply right he was. The last normal conversation I had with Carlos was 3 weeks before Ernesto's death. He came alone, without Jasmine, and seemed more serious than usual. "Mom," he told me, sitting at the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast so many times as a child, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, Enrique and I will always take care of you." His words reassured me at that moment, but now, remembering them by Ernesto's grave, they sent shivers down my spine. Why did he say no matter what happens? What did he know that I did? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Ernesto had left early for the shop, as he had done every day for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch when the phone rang with an urgency that gave me chills. "Mrs. Morales?" asked an unfamiliar voice. "I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has suffered a serious accident. You must come immediately." The words blurred in my mind. The world stopped. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to hold onto the doorframe to avoid collapsing. My neighbor Dolers drove me to the hospital because I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the keys. On the way, my mind refused to process what was happening. Ernesto was careful, meticulous in his work. How could this have happened? When we arrived, Carlos and Enrique were already there. That surprised me because no one had notified them, not me at least. But in my desperation, I didn't pay attention to that detail. "Mom," Carlos said, hugging me, "Dad is in bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines in the shop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury." Enrique's eyes were red, but something in his expression seemed strange. He looked more nervous than sad, like someone waiting for important news rather than someone grieving for his father. When I walked into that intensive care room, my heart sank. Ernesto was lying there, wrapped in bandages with tubes and machines surrounding him. His face was swollen, almost unrecognizable, but it was his hand that broke me. Burned, trembling slightly, reaching out blindly as if searching for me. I rushed to his side, holding that fragile hand between mine. "I'm here, my love," I whispered, though my tears choked me. His eyes fluttered open for a second, filled with pain but also recognition. He tried to speak, but the machines and his injuries made it impossible. Still, I understood everything in his gaze: fear, urgency, and a silent plea. The doctors told me his chances were slim. The explosion had caused internal injuries, and his body was too weak to fight. I refused to accept it. For 2 weeks, I stayed by his side day and night, praying, feeding him sips of water, talking to him about our memories, our children, everything we had lived together. But Carlos and Enrique were different. They visited, yes, but only briefly, always whispering among themselves, checking documents, taking calls in the hallway. I told myself it was their way of coping, but deep down I felt an unease I couldn't shake. Then one night the machines began to beep wildly. Doctors rushed in, pushing me aside. "Cardiac arrest!" someone shouted. I felt my legs give way as I watched them try to bring Ernesto back. Minutes later, the monitor flatlined. My world ended in that sound. Carlos signed the papers quickly, with a calmness that pierced me. Enrique guided me to a chair, his words coldly rehearsed. "Mom, you need to be strong. Dad is in a better place now." The funeral was arranged in record time. Too quickly, I thought. The coffin was closed. Because of the burns, they explained. Friends and neighbors came to say goodbye, but I could barely hear them. My mind was fogged with grief and confusion. And then, at the cemetery, my phone vibrated. That cursed message, "I'm alive. That is not me in that coffin." The world spun around me. I looked at my sons again, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid of them. When I walked into that intensive care room, my heart sank. Ernesto was lying there, wrapped in bandages with tubes and machines surrounding him. His face was swollen, almost unrecognizable, but it was his hand that broke me. Burned, trembling slightly, reaching out blindly as if searching for me. I rushed to his side, holding that fragile hand between mine. "I'm here, my love," I whispered, though my tears choked me. His eyes fluttered open for a second, filled with pain but also recognition. He tried to speak, but the machines and his injuries made it impossible. Still, I understood everything in his gaze: fear, urgency, and a silent plea. The doctors told me his chances were slim. The explosion had caused internal injuries, and his body was too weak to fight. I refused to accept it. For 2 weeks, I stayed by his side day and night, praying, feeding him sips of water, talking to him about our memories, our children, everything we had lived together. But Carlos and Enrique were different. They visited, yes, but only briefly, always whispering among themselves, checking documents, taking calls in the hallway. I told myself it was their way of coping, but deep down I felt an unease I couldn't shake. Then one night the machines began to beep wildly. Doctors rushed in, pushing me aside. "Cardiac arrest!" someone shouted. I felt my legs give way as I watched them try to bring Ernesto back. Minutes later, the monitor flatlined. My world ended in that sound. Carlos signed the papers quickly, with a calmness that pierced me. Enrique guided me to a chair, his words coldly rehearsed. "Mom, you need to be strong. Dad is in a better place now." The funeral was arranged in record time. Too quickly, I thought. The coffin was closed. Because of the burns, they explained. Friends and neighbors came to say goodbye, but I could barely hear them. My mind was fogged with grief and confusion. And then, at the cemetery, my phone vibrated. That cursed message: "I'm alive. That is not me in that coffin." The world spun around me. I looked at my sons again, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid of them. I typed with trembling fingers, "I don't understand. Where are you?" The response came immediately. "I can't say. They're watching me. Don't trust our sons." I lifted my eyes, searching for answers in Carlos and Enrique's faces. They were standing close to each other, whispering, their expressions too calm for two men burying their father. Their tears looked forced. Their embraces felt as cold as the wind in that cemetery. Memories flooded my mind. Carlos's strange words weeks earlier: "No matter what happens, Enrique and I will always take care of you." What did he know? What had they done? I stared at the coffin. Was Ernesto really inside? Or had my sons orchestrated something darker, something unthinkable? My world was collapsing, and I realized the nightmare was only beginning. Ernesto was connected to a dozen machines, with bandages covering most of his face and arms. I barely recognized him. His breathing was labored, sustained by machines that beeped constantly. I approached his bed and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed intact. "Ernesto, my love, I'm here. Everything is going to be all right. You're going to recover just like you always do." For a moment, I felt a faint squeeze in my hand. His eyes moved beneath his closed eyelids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to return to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived in the hospital, sleeping on the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room. Carlos and Enrique took turns accompanying me, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors than in comforting their father. I overheard fragmented conversations that I didn't fully understand at the time. Enrique asking about health insurance, about the cost of treatment. Carlos on the phone talking about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. "Mama," Carlos told me on the second day, "we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a $50,000 policy. There's also a workplace accident policy that could cover up to $5,000 more." Why was he talking about money when Ernesto was still fighting for his life? Why worry about insurance instead of his father's recovery? "I don't care about the money," I replied sharply. "I just want your father to recover." "Of course, Mama," he said, but I saw something in his eyes that I didn't like, a coldness, as if he were calculating while his father lay dying. On the third day, the doctors gave us the most devastating news of my life. Dr. Perez gathered us in a small office. "Mrs. Morales, your husband's condition is critical. The burns have become infected, and the head trauma is more severe than we initially thought. We need to be realistic about his chances." "What does that mean?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. It means we need to prepare for the worst. Your husband is in an induced coma. We could keep him alive indefinitely, but the chances of him ever regaining consciousness are extremely low. My world collapsed. 42 years of marriage, an entire life built together. And now they were telling me that everything was fading away like smoke. We want to try everything, I sobbed. No matter the cost, no matter how long it takes. But Carlos exchanged a look with Enrique that left me deeply disturbed. Mama, Carlos said in a voice that tried to sound compassionate, we have to be practical. Papa wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden to anyone. A burden? I exploded with a fury I didn't know I had. He's your father, not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who worked his entire life to give you the best he could. We know, Mama, Enrique intervened. But we also have to think about you. The medical bills will be enormous. They could wipe out all your savings. Again, money, always money. My husband was dying and they were calculating costs. That night, alone in the hospital room, I held Ernesto's hand and spoke to him as if he could hear me. My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you. That was when something happened that still gives me chills. His fingers moved slightly, squeezing mine with an almost imperceptible strength. His lips moved as if he were trying to say something, but no sound came out. I called the nurses desperately. He's reacting, he's trying to talk. But when they arrived, Ernesto had returned to his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, Senora. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew what I had felt. Ernesto had tried to communicate with me. He had struggled to tell me something important. 2 days later, in the early hours of the morning, the machine alarms went off, lights flashed, and nurses rushed into Ernesto's room. I had been dozing in the hallway when the noise woke me. No, 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 I screamed, running into the room. The doctors worked for 40 minutes trying to resuscitate him, but it was useless. At 4:37 a.m., Ernesto was officially declared dead. The pain I felt in that moment was physical, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. I collapsed beside his bed, hugging his still warm body, refusing to accept that he was gone forever. Carlos and Enrique arrived at the hospital an hour after their father's death. They seemed prepared, as if they had been waiting for the call. They brought papers, documents, and phone numbers of funeral homes. We already spoke with the funeral home in San Juan del Rio, Carlos told me while I was still crying inconsolably. Can they pick up the body this morning? We also contacted the insurance, Enrique added. The claims process is already underway. How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold, barely an hour after losing their father? Something was wrong, but my grief was so overwhelming I couldn't think clearly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Carlos took care of all the arrangements without really consulting me. He chose the simplest coffin, the shortest service, as if he wanted everything over with as quickly as possible. It's what Papa would have wanted, he said when I complained about not being included in the decisions. Something simple, without fuss. But Ernesto deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and forget him. The day of the funeral arrived, gray and cold, as if the sky itself was mourning Ernesto. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn at my mother's funeral years before. My hands trembled so much that dolors had to help me fasten the small buttons on the back. Be strong, Margarita, my dear friend whispered as she carefully brushed my hair. Ernesto would want to see you strong. But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage cannot be buried so easily. Every object in the house reminded me of him. His coffee cup on the table, his tools on the porch, his pillow that still carried his scent. When we arrived at the cemetery, I was surprised at how few people attended. I had expected more of Ernesto's colleagues, more neighbors, more acquaintances, but it was only Carlos, Enrique, Jasmine, Dolors, me, and the pastor. Where are the guys from the workshop? I asked Carlos. We didn't want to bother anyone, he quickly replied. Papa was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. But that wasn't true. Ernesto loved his community. He cared about his neighbors. He would have wanted them to come and say goodbye. Why had Carlos decided to make everything so secret, so rushed? During the service, I observed my children with a strange emotional detachment. Carlos maintained a solemn expression appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes kept drifting to his watch. Enrique seemed restless, as if he had more important things to do. Jasmine discreetly checked her phone behind her black veil. That was how they said goodbye to their father, with impatience and distractions. When the time came to throw dirt over the coffin, my legs refused to hold me. Dolores had to support me as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of the earth hitting the wood was final, conclusive, without hope. It was at that precise moment, standing beside the grave, that my cell phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. I'm alive. That's not me in that coffin. My heart stopped. The letters danced before me as if I were hallucinating. I thought I was going mad with grief. With trembling hands, I replied. Who are you? The response came immediately. I can't say. They're watching me. Don't trust our sons. The phone slipped from my hands as if it were burning me. Dolores bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages, not until I understood what was happening. Are you okay, Mama? Carlos asked, approaching with a concerned expression. I looked at him, trying to find some clue in his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every expression seemed suspicious. I'm fine, I lied, slipping the phone into my purse. I just need to go home. On the way back, I couldn't stop thinking about those messages. Was it possible that someone was playing a cruel joke on me at the worst moment of my life? Or was there truly a possibility that Ernesto was alive? But if he was alive, who had we buried? That night, alone in my house that now felt like a tomb, I went over every detail of the past few days. Ernesto's accident had been strange from the beginning. According to Carlos, a machine had exploded in the workshop, but Ernesto knew every bolt in that place. He was meticulous with maintenance, obsessive about safety. Besides, how had my sons arrived at the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How had they learned about the accident before I did? And then there was the money. From the very first day, Carlos and Enrique had spoken about insurance policies and beneficiaries, as if they had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. I decided to check Ernesto's papers. In his old wooden desk, he kept all important documents in a metal box. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy Carlos had mentioned, but there was something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated only 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why had Ernesto increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned this change to me, and more importantly, who had suggested it to him. I kept searching and found something even more disturbing. A workplace accident insurance policy I hadn't known about, purchased only 2 months before his death. $5,000 in case of accidental death at work. A fortune for a family like ours, but also tempting enough for someone unscrupulous. My cell phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account. See who has been moving money. This time I didn't hesitate. Whoever this person was, they knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details only someone very close to us could know. The next day I went to the bank where Ernesto and I had kept our account for 30 years. Mrs. Childre, the manager who had known us for years, greeted me with sincere condolences. Margarita, I'm so sorry about Ernesto. He was a good man. Thank you, Mrs. Childre. I've come to review our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation. She showed me the statements from the past 6 months. What I saw froze me. In the last 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings account. In January, $3,000. In February, $4,000. In March, more. Money I hadn't known had been taken out. Who authorized these withdrawals? I asked with a trembling voice. Your husband came personally, explained Mrs. Juarez. He said he needed the money for repairs at the workshop. But I managed the household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and what we spent it on. Ernesto had never mentioned costly repairs at the workshop. Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals? I asked. She showed me the receipts. They did look like Ernesto's signature, but something about the handwriting seemed strange. It was too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm and clear writing. Mrs. Juarez, I asked, my heart racing. Did he come alone to make these withdrawals or was someone with him? She thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, I think he came with one of his sons once or twice, Carlos, I believe. He said he was helping his father with the paperwork because Ernesto had trouble reading documents without his glasses. Carlos, my son, had been involved in withdrawals I hadn't known about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Ernesto saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I looked over the bank receipts again and again, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernesto he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the evidence piling up. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized withdrawals, Carlos's involvement in transactions I didn't know about, his suspicious efficiency in arranging the funeral, his coldness during his father's agony. But the question that terrified me was, if they had truly planned Ernesto's death, how had they done it? And who was sending me these messages? The following days became a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every smile from Carlos, every hug from Enrique, every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before accepting such a horrible truth. My cell phone kept receiving messages from the mysterious number. Go to Ernesto's workshop, look in his desk. There are things you haven't seen. I decided to go to the workshop for the first time since the accident. Carlos had said a machine exploded, but when I got there, I found something completely different from what I expected. The workshop was strangely clean, too clean to have been the site of an explosion. There were no burn marks on the walls, no debris, no signs of the destruction such a serious accident should have caused. Where is the machine that exploded? I asked aloud as I examined the place. Every machine was in its place, working perfectly. The welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all intact. So what had caused the accident? On Ernesto's desk, I found something that gave me chills. A note written in his handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. Carlos insists that I need more insurance. He says it's for Margarita, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Beneath that note was another. Enrique brought me papers to sign. He says it's to modernize the workshop, but I don't understand what they're about. Why such a rush? My husband had been suspicious. He had sensed our son's bad intentions, but he died before he could tell me. I kept searching and found a sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter from Ernesto. My dearest Margarita, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Carlos and Enrique. They are very interested in our money, in the insurance, in selling the house. Jasmine is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Carlos told me I should worry more about my safety, because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Margarita. If something happens to me, don't blindly trust anyone, not even our sons. The letter slipped from my hands. Ernesto had foreseen his own death. He had seen the signs that I, blinded by maternal love, had ignored. That night, Carlos came to visit me. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that now seemed completely fake. Mama, I've been thinking about your future, he said, pouring himself a glass without asking if I wanted one. The insurance money is already being processed. It will be $125,000. How do you know the exact amount? I asked, feigning innocence. Well, I helped Papa with the insurance paperwork. He wanted to make sure you'd have enough money to live comfortably. A lie. Ernesto had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own note, he had been pressured by Carlos. And what do you think I should do with that money? I asked, carefully watching his reaction. His eyes lit up with a glint that gave me chills. You could buy a smaller, cozier house, or better yet, move to a nice retirement community where you'd have company and medical care. Enrique and I could manage your money to make it go further. Manage my money, the audacity. We just want to take care of you, Mama. At your age, it's easy to be tricked or make bad financial decisions. We know about investments, about business. We could triple that amount in a few years. Let me think about it, I said, trying to buy time. Of course, he replied with his false sweetness, but don't take too long for your own good. After he left, I sat in the kitchen trembling with rage and fear. My own sons had not only murdered their father, but now they planned to rob me of everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a longer message than the others. Margarita, I'm Stephen Ramiers, a private detective. Ernesto hired me 3 weeks before he died because he distrusted Carlos and Enrique. They poisoned him with methanol mixed into his morning coffee. I have audio evidence of their conversations, planning everything. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., go to the cafe on the corner. Sit at the back table. I'll be there. Finally, I would know who had been sending me those messages, and more importantly, I would have the evidence needed to get justice for my husband's death. But I also knew I didn't have much time. Carlos and Enrique had revealed their intentions. If I didn't act quickly, I would end up locked in a nursing home while they spent the money that had cost Ernesto his life. The war had begun, and although I was a 66-year-old woman against 2 ruthless men, I had something they didn't: the truth. And the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to come to light. The next day arrived heavy with nerves and expectation. I dressed carefully, choosing my most serious purple dress. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I walked to the cafe with determined but cautious steps. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every person on the street could be a spy sent by my sons. The cafe was moderately full. I went straight to the back table, as instructed. I ordered a chamomile tea and waited, my hands trembling. My recordings might have been enough for a conviction, but now we have all the evidence together, I said, feeling a mix of pain and determination. Exactly, and there's one more thing you need to know. My blood froze. What? Your sons were also planning to kill you. Stephen played one last recording, with the voices of Carlos and Enrique together. After we get Dad's insurance money, we also have to get rid of Mom, said Carlos. We can't risk her suspecting or someone putting ideas in her head. How? Enrique asked. The same way as with Dad, but this time we can make it look like suicide from depression. A widow who can't live without her husband, no one would question it. And with the money, we'd be the only heirs. Everything would be ours: the house, the savings, the insurance money, almost $200,000 in total. The recording stopped. I trembled uncontrollably. My sons had not only murdered their father, but they had also planned to murder me, all for money. Mrs. Morales, Stephen said softly, I know this is devastating, but we have enough evidence to make them pay for what they did. What do we do now? I asked, drying my tears. First, we need to go to the police with all this evidence. Sergeant Morno is an honest man, not involved in corruption. Second, we have to act fast. Your sons are planning to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow. How do you know that? I intercepted a phone call this morning. They're meeting with Judge Gomez at 10 a.m. to start the process of declaring you mentally incapacitated. I stood with a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. Then we have to act tonight. That same night, Stephen and I went straight to the police station. Sergeant Morno was on the night shift, which was perfect for our purposes. When we arrived, I presented all the evidence: the audio recordings, the photographs of Carlos buying methanol, the bank documents showing the unauthorized withdrawals, Ernesto's medical results proving his perfect health. And finally, the recorded conversations where my sons confessed both to murdering their father and planning to kill me. The sergeant listened to each recording with an increasingly serious expression. "This is monstrous," he muttered when we finished. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we arrest your sons, there's no going back." "Sergeant," I replied with all the dignity I could muster, "these men murdered my husband in cold blood for money. They were planning to murder me too. They're no longer my sons, they're criminals who must pay for their crimes." 3 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from various regional newspapers came to cover what was already known as the case of the killer sons. The evidence was irrefutable. The recordings didn't lie. The bank documents didn't lie. The forensic evidence of methanol in Ernesto's exhumed body didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with trembling legs but a clear mind. "Mrs. Morales," the prosecutor asked me, "can you tell us what your relationship with your sons was like before your husband's murder?" "I thought I had a good relationship with them," I replied, looking directly at Carlos and Enrique. "I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father worked from dawn to dusk to give them the best we could. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would become the reason for murder." The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. When they returned, the silence in the room was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat as the judge read the verdict. In the case of the state versus Carlos Morales and Enrique Morales on the charge of first-degree murder of Ernesto Morales, we find the defendants guilty. Carlos collapsed in his chair. Enrique remained rigid, staring forward without expression. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Margarita Morales, we find the defendants guilty. The judge immediately proceeded to sentencing. "Carlos Morales and Enrique Morales, for the premeditated murder of your father and the conspiracy to murder your mother, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 30 years. When I heard those words, I felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders. Justice. There was finally justice for Ernesto. Today, 2 years after the trial, I live peacefully in my small house. I converted Ernesto's workshop into a garden where I grow flowers to take to his grave every Sunday. Stephen has become a close friend, visiting me regularly to make sure I'm okay. Sometimes the neighbors ask if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children they were, but those children died long before Ernesto. The men they became were not my sons. They were strangers who shared my blood but not my heart. I've learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and mutual respect. Ernesto was my true family for 42 years. The friends who supported me during the trial are my family now. Justice didn't bring Ernesto back, but it gave me peace. And on quiet nights, when I sit on the porch where we so often drank coffee together, I swear I can feel his presence, proud of me for being strong enough to do the right thing, even if it meant losing my sons forever. 5 years after that terrible day at the cemetery, I founded the Ernesto Morales Foundation for victims of family crimes, using the insurance money to help others who have gone through similar tragedies. No amount of money could bring my husband back, but every person we help is a small victory against the darkness that nearly consumed me. As I told a young woman who came to seek help last week, family is not an excuse for crime. Love with boundaries is true love, and it is never too late to seek justice, no matter who the culprit is. Now, if you liked this story, click on the next video that appears on the screen, because in it there's a story of betrayal and twists like you've never seen before. Yeah,